Hey, good morning. Welcome to Office Hours. I'm glad that we can be posting this on YouTube for others to be able to observe and participate in, just as right now we get this group together to be able to talk about places and the buildings that we have in our communities that make our community stronger, or as is often the case, weaker as well. And so today, joining us is Edward Erfurt, who's the Director of Community Action at Strong Towns, as well as the Chief Technical Advisor for all of the work that we are doing with various communities, seeking to engage them in understanding what it takes to build communities in a Strong Towns way, understanding the core basics of the Strong Towns approach and trying to get a sense of that. And so as part of our office hours today, we're going to go through a number of questions that I've prepared for Edward, and then open it up also for a more general discussion. So Edward, starting with, do you want to touch, maybe just to set the groundwork, what was your experience in city administration that sort of gave you insight into what it takes to work with local developers, with project proponents, to figure out ways to make their projects better?
Yeah, well, I started out in the private sector. I started out in an urban design firm or a couple of different firms working on all different scales, working with developers. Uh, in 2008, when the world kind of collapsed, when that work wasn't available, what was interesting is that local government hadn't quite caught up to the crash of the private sector. And I was able to get a job in what I thought would be just a few months. I had no idea that I'd be 15 some years into it. But got a job in a municipality that had a redevelopment agency. In that realm, I thought that I just needed to do what I was doing as the consultant for my clients and for cities, but under the flag of the local government. I didn't know better. It basically is what many people told me. But I took the risk of using my skill sets of listening and drawing. So my background is in architecture and urban design. So just bringing that to the table. Um, I got very upset sitting in meetings in local government, hearing 15 people sit around the table and tell all the reasons why this plan wouldn't work. And then when they did round robin of that, they then would pause and remember all the things they forgot that they needed to bring back. And I found that it was just easier to kind of like take that charrette model, that rapid fire drawing, draw what you say on a piece of paper, and work through it. And in many cases, working with the development community, what I did is I shifted the departments I was in from being just a backseat receiver of projects to actually hunting projects, actually designing what we thought we wanted to have in our community, and then shared that. And I shared it broadly and without any like, it was just boxes. And then when people would kind of tell me, well, you can't fit this type of use in that box, I would I would shift the box with a new drawing. So repetitively doing that and being in local government, I could sit there with the decision makers and show them this stuff in not this adversarial position. Just be like, we would walk through the codes. I used to joke that I thought that we needed to do kind of like what people do at church. I think we needed to sit at the beginning of all of our planning meetings and read one section of the code out loud so we could all hear it. I guarantee you, once you do that, one, people don't know that these sections are in your code, and then when you read them, they will sound terrible, either because they're poor grammar or that they just actually can't be accomplished. So working through that, but yeah, that's what I did. I was kind of this rogue person. I upset lots and lots of engineering practices. I excited lots and lots of developers. And what I could tell you in this process, we kind of cut through the typical bureaucratic process to the point that projects could get approved. In the last jurisdiction I was in, we could get projects approved with public hearings, uh, big master plan developments in 2 months. We could work very quickly because we knew what needed to be laid out in those plans. So yeah, some might say that's the dark arts. Some might say that that's local government getting involved where they shouldn't be. I just took a different approach. If local government needed to generate revenue, if we needed that revenue to do all the other things that we needed to do in local government, we needed to make sure that projects we had coming forward were the most productive. And by reworking things, frankly, in modest ways, we could see much higher rates of return And then I had a whole line. Even to this day, I've not been in one jurisdiction for almost 8 years, 9 years now. And I still get developers and landowners in that community calling me, asking me what I would think about this site. And I have to tell them, look, your comprehensive plan has changed, your zoning code has changed. In one community, you actually have incorporated from the county which you were originally operating in. Um, but they appreciated that kind of frank piece. And when a developer comes in and it's not the right project, telling them right day one, I was unabashed with that. But I would show them what they could do. So yeah, I'm odd in how these things are, but I started to find there were more people out there that were doing this, and would encourage local municipalities to be more forward thinking when they do development.
You wrote about this project, and I think the article is great, and you did a great job of sort of saying like this is what they had initially proposed, just a very blank building that didn't meet the performance standards of the community. And then just with a sketching pad, you were able to say like, hey, based on, I think if I understand sort of the or oh, sorry, let me scroll one up. You said, let's take this as our inspiration. If this is the type of stuff that we want to see in our community, if these are the types of sort of historical precedents that we want to use to sort of continue to foster that sense of place, then you came back to them, and then this was sort of the outcome, is that it actually took that form much closer to the street, much more like tied in with where the neighborhood sort of can emerge from or sort of develop from. And so do you want to talk about the project generally, but also why like bringing that build to line closer to the street is so critical, and maybe some lessons for other people as they try to work within their own community to ask these types of questions?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think everybody needs to know is that McDonald's is not a hamburger company. It is a land development company. And I met some of the sharpest people when it came to land development. They knew the codes better than we did. They all were the land development team for McDonald's. So this is a placeholder McDonald's has set in to make the deal work for this site. Like, again, when I'm talking with my pencil, when I'm talking to the development team outside of like what shrubbery to put in and what color the building is, when we actually are talking about the delivery process, what I learned is that I could not touch McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's, we could tweak things so there's the right parapet and the right colored lighting on the building, and the font of McDonald's was right. Like that's as much as I could touch on that project. This was something their corporate folks had set up out of Chicago, and it just wasn't going to change. That made the deal happen. The Dollar General was a profit on the development. Um, and with them, the municipality had a architectural code, like here are 12 things. If you do 8, you pass.
Yeah.
And the dollar store folks couldn't figure it out. Now, talking to McDonald's, they knew what they had. I mean, this is the standard. I'm sure all of us have one of these or have seen one of these in our community. And it was a box. And it was the architects were not that creative,
Yeah.
so they couldn't figure it out. When I talked to everybody in town, they told me that hotel, that traditional architecture, which is kind of a hodgepodge of stuff, that's what they wanted more things to look like. And they had gone through and done plans and for like 15 years told everybody build like this, but they didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
So all I did is I took like the blank box, and this is the better version, what they did. And I just started sketching and said, well, look, you can kind of see what the roof line looks like of that building. I thought one of the check marks you could get was doing a canopy.
Yeah.
So you put a canopy out. So I just said, well, let's just put a canopy out there. Let's do some stuff in stucco. Let's just move the lights where they need to go. No big deal. And you get this result. Um, that sparked enough of a thought process to the McDonald's development team to tell the dollar store, like, get a different architecture team. This is what you need to do. And what surprised me is what actually came out of it. I mean, the architects went beyond where I drew.
Yeah. Yeah.
They actually, instead of just doing like an aluminum canopy, they pushed this big arcade out front. The arcade allowed them to get rid of all those bollards they put,
Mm.
because apparently dollar stores have people that drive into them. So they had like these now concrete columns out front. They got rid of a lot of the handicap signs they put on the building. So all of these things kind of emerged out of that. Uh, the developer shared with me, this really didn't cost them any more.
Mm,
It looks pretty grandiose. The other thing, when I talk about I'm like the odd guy out, and I think that we need to be more productive and stuff, this is a community that had not seen a commercial development permit for 35 years.
mm,
Could
mhm.
you imagine? I know many of you are elected officials and are on appointed boards. Uh, this is a community that anything that would come.
Yeah.
I mean, if they could get a vape shop, that would be like they do grand openings and give them a subsidy.
Yeah.
This had no subsidies to it. So like really kind of sticking with our guns with it. The other piece to it, the other story that's not shared with that often is that this is on a very busy highway that in Florida that we couldn't actually get buildings built up to the street like we wanted. So this is where I introduced that drive aisle in front. If you notice, there's a stop bar and there's some painted stuff on the street and there's a stop sign. We worked with this development team to build a frontage road. So a parallel local street in what would be a parking lot.
Yeah.
The McDonald's didn't want people parked in front of them, so they have a little plaza space. The dollar store wanted the parking in front. So we just designed it like a little street. This is now being taken up by the other developments up and down the roadway. Not everybody can get driveway access. Uh, where I'm standing is where there's a traffic light. So the other developments along this corridor that are now coming in now have this frontage road, this parallel route
Mhm.
that's slow traffic. It allows for parking, allows for pedestrians to walk. So there's a sidewalk at the buildings and there's a sidewalk out at the street. So this hit a lot of different things, and it really was crucial being the first development in so many years to set the stage. I couldn't get it up to the highway, but I could get them to design a parking lot that felt like a street.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
building it up to the street has a lot of benefits. One, it maximizes the development potential for the site. So you're not wasting with a landscape buffer. Uh, but also just the environment, the built environment when buildings are put closer to the street. Uh, McDonald's and Dollar General were not going to be able to get a freestanding standalone sign in front of their building because of the codes. Uh, but they're so close to the street, it'd be redundant and silly to have stuff out at the street. So
Yeah.
you could see on the front, the architecture is set to really have the imagery of these stores, but also their big marquee signage. And being up to the street, people can see it versus being set back and having to do a duplicate sign at the roadway.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think you touched on the idea that like this doesn't require subsidy. And I think this is one of the areas where Strong Towns is very critical of the idea that a lot of subsidies are often sort of like, well, maybe we got to throw some sort of sweetener into the pot and make this happen when there are still, it's we'll give you the subsidy, but you still have to do this like song and dance in order to get through like our process where we're asking about the wrong things and ignoring the right things. How does this I guess how do we teach this? How do we popularize sort of versions of what you were sort of empowered to do by your community leaders in order to like, and maybe there's a bit of a story there of maybe taking on some of that responsibility to be like, hey, call me. And a lot of municipalities, I think, feel that sense like you were on one side of the counter or the other. And so we hear stories of builders saying, I just wanted to get like a yes or no from the city. Like, am I in the ballpark? And they're like, we're not allowed to tell you if you're in the ballpark unless you've submitted your final application. And that just seems so counter to the way that, the corporate world works, to the way that households work. The idea of iterating versus like you have to submit everything in a sealed envelope as is, and then nothing can change while this like extended review process goes on. How do we break out of that process? It's very orderly, but it's extremely dumb, to use the article that we shared a while back. Yeah, kind of how do we get to this place?
Yeah. So what I found, there were a couple of things that I learned through school and then through the private sector that I migrated into government. There's a term called a charrette. A lot of people use this term. It's an architecture term. The École des Beaux-Arts, the architecture school in Paris, there's this story, this kind of beautiful story that goes with that only could come out of French architecture. But the students at the École des Beaux-Arts that were doing these beautiful watercolors and these big drawings, at the end of the semester, the charrette would come around to all of the people to pick up their work to bring it to the school to be posted. And of course, architects are like the worst procrastinators. So they were still working on the drawings up into the very last moment.
Hmm.
So not only would they load their drawings on the charrette on the cart, they'd be working on them as they were going to the building through town. That's the beautiful story. What's come out of that is that through the planning and architecture fields, they found that by getting people around the table in a finite amount of time to test out a lot of ideas, to draw it in real time, kind of in live theater, could result in a lot of consensus building.
Hmm.
And we have to recognize that very few, even the professionals I work with, can read plans. This is like a Latin or Greek language. So even the best plans that we see, there are things in there that we miss because it's a different language. And we don't really see the world in 2 dimension. So I brought this forward, and what I did is I basically merged this idea of a pre-application meeting with the private sector idea of a charrette.
Hmm.
When somebody would come into my office, I'd make sure that there were the people that would not say no. Like the no people never made it to the first meeting, but I'd bring folks in and ask them, lots of questions and work with them with their plans and not be afraid to draw on their plans.
Hmm.
So in the pre-application meeting, we would go through and I'd explain, look, these are the rules. There's certain parameters that I knew from the get-go that were no-goes. I knew that where parking had to be in the back. There was no go that parking was going to be in front of a building. So build to the street. There are certain architectural features or characteristics that had to be present. Some of that would be the amount of glass on the front of the building. It could be the form, how tall it had to be, the pieces in it. So knowing those parameters, I could work real time with the developer who had the money and the vision and their consultants, their engineers, their architects to draw real time what they were thinking and how this would meet the code.
Hmm.
And what I found is that early in the process, when they're like kicking the tires to see if this is a project they want to, like a community they want to be in, everything was highly malleable. We could move buildings around. My tricks were always to use, I wouldn't add anything new to the page. So I would take a building and move it around on the site. If they had 6 parking spaces, I always wanted to make sure the end result was 8. If they were doing stormwater with a lot of pipes, I wanted to make sure I could do stormwater without pipes.
Hmm.
So that as I would lay these things out, I could see the reaction from the development team and the engineers. And I would usually get phone calls after. And by doing this many times, I get phone calls with real dollars and cents of these projects. So anything I would show and draw either yielded out more development potential or lower cost for infrastructure. And I could guarantee with all of these folks that we could expedite their review process. We could streamline it, and they had an ally within government that was going to help usher this. Chuck called me a Sherpa. I was a Sherpa. The technical term is urban designer. But I like when I would draw on the pages, I would get excited about it. I made sure I was excited about it because the development team knew that if City Hall was excited about it, they had a better chance of moving forward. Um, so yeah, I mean, in addition to drawing, I would also go through the timeline with the development team.
Mhm.
And very, very few communities. I think if I went into all your communities, there is not an accurate timeline of a project. And this is from the time of inception. I bought a piece of property to I have a tenant that has moved in.
Mhm.
I would outline that and show that. And in all of the regulations, anything we could do by right, anything we do that we didn't have permission, we go through. The last jurisdiction I was in the almost 7 years I was there, we went to Board of Zoning Adjustments once.
Hmm.
In over 1,000 residential units, in hundreds of thousands of square feet of commercial. We worked with what we had in the code, being creative and getting the end result. So I only had one developer that disagreed that went forward to it, and that they knew it was so difficult to get a zoning variance. We could find other creative ways that would get them a faster result. So kind of carrot stick, get everything organized, be deliberate on where yes and no's are up front, with the code. It wasn't me as staff making that decision. It was with the code. Only 2 or 3 times did I have to go and kind of like embarrass a developer in front of a planning commission for them to say no. Like they didn't believe me. They just thought they could roll over the planning commission. Happy to let you hear what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
Like, so we'll
Yeah.
take that forward. But all of that led up to where we built trust in the process, and the end game is we got things built.
Right. And better things built that arguably not only saved the city in terms of review time, in terms of like just the wrangling. Every meeting of a planning commission comes with a certain burn rate of the cost of staff to be there, as well as the opportunity cost of what other people could be doing with their time if they weren't stuck in those sort of settings. And at the same time, if there's actually like, I know our mayor a number of years back in the community I lived in really disliked franchises and really wanted them to be held to a much higher standard. So we have a really nice McDonald's. It only pays 1/7 the amount of property tax that like our local coffee shop does because of the development pattern, which I always point out. But it is, it's got a vaulted roof. It actually had like fake stained glass. It was sort of a version of like a barn, sort of an agriculturally inspired like McDonald's. But that all came as an extra. So there was no savings that then were basically the reason why that justified the additional spending. It was basically like playing hardball. If you want to be here at this prime location next to our hospital and transit exchange, you better step up with a better designed building. Talk to me about like what you're proposing. I think really sort of lays out like you can get to yes a lot easier, but what are some of the core assumptions of the performance of a building that is being newly constructed in a place? What are those standards that we should be holding high?
Yeah, let me show you. Let me walk through something. We've all gone through and experienced. Let's see, am I getting you? We've all seen the Taco Johns. We've gone through this, and we can see that the new shiny new project is only half the revenue. Am I flipping through the slides? Okay. And I wrote about this alternative of Taco John's, like where are our values? What do we repeat? What do we go through? When we look at a site like this, one of the things that I always say is build to the street. So we can see Taco John's is pushed way back. So the dumpsters and the cooking and all of that is closer to the houses, is not closer to the street.
Can you
The street gets,
the sharing is only of your main section. So if you just scroll down in PowerPoint, we'll be able to see it sort of in the, but I think we're seeing your preview mode or your.
yeah, let me.
While you're doing that, I'm going to drop in not only Chuck's article, the original one about Taco John's, just for later, but also Edward's got a fantastic piece on what do you actually do with Taco John's? How would you make it better? And it's, oh yeah, and you're describing it here, but it's,
Yeah.
there we go. I can see your slides perfectly
So
now.
yeah, so we've gone through, we've all kind of experienced that Taco John's, and I can tell what I heard every time I heard Chuck talk is like, well, what's next, Chuck? What do we do? How do we do this stuff? And um, I was doing that. So when we look at this, when we talk about build to the street, the Taco John's, we could see where the drive-through is, the noise of this, everything's pushed back to the houses, not to the street.
Interesting.
When we talk about productive streets, getting stuff closer to the street. So anytime you can push a building closer to the street, by default, you're going to get a better street.
Yeah.
Things are going to be closer to the street. The signage is going to be easier to see. You're going to actually, the shop fronts are going to interact. The shop owner who may only sweep by the front door is actually going to sweep on the sidewalk, on the public realm.
Mm-hmm.
So all I did was just move the building to the street. I didn't change the footprint at all. It actually yields out more parking. It's more efficient. I even left a little crazy parking on the end in case people wanted to have their VIP parking. But the drive-through just comes on the back of the building. So we just moved it to the street. When you do that, all of a sudden you start to realize that there's an alleyway in the back. That's an investment a town like Brainerd has already made. All of the commercial buildings in Brainerd, except for Taco John's, use the alley.
Mm-hmm.
So getting the driveway off the front of the street takes out the safety issues. It's a permit that you don't have to deal with the state on anymore. That's what developers get excited about. It's usually an expensive permit that the engineers make you do. The side streets are local streets. So that's just the city getting an approval. When you erase the duplicate stuff that the design teams put in, you begin to save money and you actually begin to support additional development. So on this particular site, we have the Taco John's. I get that the trash can is up against the street. It's not ideal, but it's still all better than what it is. So for just illustrative
I
purposes,
mean, Disney has figured out ways to put trash cans in the middle of like 5,000
yeah,
people and
well,
nobody bats an eye. It's
yeah.
not a
So
sign.
like,
Yeah.
or it could be in the parking lot, wherever it needs to be. But I'm using the same footprints. I'm just sliding them on the lot. The trick to this, if you're not comfortable with a pencil, you can Xerox it and cut it out. I think incremental development, they call it the paper doll model.
I like that.
So you just take the pieces, the same size scale, you cut it out on a piece of construction paper and slide it on the page. When I looked at this on this site at one story, just boxes. All of this now, there's 10,000 square feet of additional development potential on this site. So when I talk about to a developer, how could we get more on your site? I say, oh no, I would need to buy more land. No, you have lots of land here, all because we were able to build to the street and be more efficient in how we use the site. And everybody knows how to get to the drive-through at Taco John's. Everybody knows how to get to the front door. And by moving to the street, frankly, people might actually use the city sidewalk to get here. When you add the additional development, 10,000 square feet, if I just take the blighted block that's next door, you can actually generate 10 times the revenue or 3 times the revenue on this site just by this. Assuming that these are wig shops and pawn shops and like the lowest of low porous construction techniques. When we get to the architecture and we go up, we change the uses to it, we could go 3, 8, 10 times the revenue on this site. Taco John's could go out on this in the future, and the rest of this would actually still be there. Taco John's could actually go and sell off this to other folks in small bite-sized chunks that become more small bets. That's a better sustainable model for Brainerd. I do this and people say this never happens because this is the type of development we're used to. I just grabbed this from Somewhere USA. I would get these types of developments at City Hall all the time. The Dunkin' Donuts in the middle. This could be Dunkin's. It could be Tim Hortons. It could be Little Caesars, McDonald's, whatever it is.
In its first life cycle, and then it becomes a little taco shop, and then it sits vacant, and then maybe a Indian restaurant, and then it goes vacant again. I see that all the time.
And look at the duplicate signs. There's signs on the buildings and signs on the street, and the sign police come out for both. In Indiantown, Florida, where that dollar store was, at the same time I met with a development group, on the left there, that's a Dunkin' Donuts. I did the paper doll exercise. I moved it up to the street. When I moved it up to the street, this little block showed up next to it. Little Caesars moved into that, and a cell phone store. It was not a hard ask early in the process to move the store up to the street. I leveraged the code. The code said build to the street. By rotating it, I also had an engineer in the county that I was working with that showed me how the drive-through could work in the back. I showed on their plans that there's this empty spot in the back on the other street. They should build a building. The code says you have to have a building there. The finances wouldn't make it happen, but we reserved it. I just made sure everybody knew that was there. A year and a half later, the building appeared. The economics for the site, and you can begin to see now in the aerial how the drive-through comes in on the Dunkin' Donuts. This all kind of works in some of these efficiencies. And I said, well, guys, now you got this block. What about the block behind you? And they came in and did the first mixed-use project in the block behind. This is what happens when you start to build to the street and you respect the neighborhood you're in. Of the Dunkin' Donuts is a national chain. It's a franchisee that owns it. The Little Caesars is a franchisee that came in as a startup. It's an easy franchise thing to get. The second thing that came in was a cell phone store, was something that the owner of the development had. that new building on the back corner are all locally owned businesses. Really, really cool sandwich shop. Somebody does a lot of catering. There's an art store that opened up, things that were unconceivable in this community prior to this development. But we just did a platform for this to go. They built this mixed use building on the back. These are a combination of live, work, and apartments. First apartment buildings in this town in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that you can't quite see, I should point out, is that in their stormwater area, once I started to get them thinking about how to be more efficient in their development patterns, in the stormwater area of the shopping center, they actually came in and built a deck across it and a public space that they dedicated, like a meeting space, to two of the town founders, two of the people that I worked with.
Yeah.
They've now passed,
Yeah.
but for 20 years wanted to see something happen in their town, and this was the first thing that happened. There are very few developers that would say the people across the table from them, they would elevate up to this. But this is the type of stuff that could be done on these sites. So this is just something that we were able to get built because we got in early, understood the process. It inspired other development that incrementally occurred over time. I could have said no to this at any time in my regulatory authority. I could have put them to the sharks, the 15 people at the county. I could have made them go through additional public hearings that weren't required, but I didn't be, but we put them out in the public so everybody can pick on them. We didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
This is all by right. We only took it to the public to show them that this was moving forward and they had support, so they knew what was being built. They were ecstatic because we framed it in a way that the community wanted to see this thing built. I'm not sure what the Dunkin' Donuts meeting was like when the development team talked to Dunkin' Donuts and said this crazy kid wanted to move stuff to the front and rearrange the drive-through. But the development team knew that that's what they needed to do. And again, we were able to show them by building to the street, by following some of the architecture principles of the community, by working through the codes, working by right stuff. We also worked to do on-street parking. They felt they needed a lot of parking. The code didn't require it. So I had them build all the extra parking they wanted in the street. So again, there wasn't a single dollar that the CRA gave to them. There wasn't a single dollar they got from anybody in the community or in the government to do that. They probably should have asked, but they didn't. What they got from me out of that was having the focus of staff to work them on the technical side through the process. So my salary paid for that. My salary was paid for as soon as the building permits were issued because of the permit fees and all of that stuff. That community now is seeing an enormous amount of tax revenue, business tax, sales tax, and property tax on that site year over year over year. And that developer is now going through town, has bought up 5 or 6 lots with this same approach. Like I've trained them on this approach and they're doing that. So I think communities can do that. I think we pay a lot of technical staff with the capability to do this. We need to allow them to be in a messy area to do that. Well, that's what I call pre-application. This is the time we can ask lots of silly questions and draw lots of silly stuff to come up with this exercise. And it's a lot of listening. I had to understand where the elected officials and the citizens I would represent and serve, being sure that move forward, but also hearing from the developer, if they can't make money, they're not going to build here. And really understanding that. And at those early phases, they're way more malleable than just choosing the right paint color on a building. They actually will move buildings around. This site had a bunch of innovative design features to it that made it very cheap, very few pipes in that site. Putting parking on street, something we learned is that they don't have to have insurance on it.
Oh,
right away, it's a municipality. So, yeah, lots of cool things that came out of that. And I did that lots of places. I just like to show the big conglomerates with the drive-throughs because those are always seem to be the most difficult.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. And we'll go to questions in a moment here, but I'm just struck by the idea that like you we need these new nuclei of organic activity within a place. And so even saying like a building can be here, but like not actually knowing what that will look like, but fairly quickly the market conditions creating that as well. Now you have a site where typically one thing would have set on that site right in its middle, like the Taco John's example. Instead, now you've got three clustered sort of economic activities and you have a park. And in that sort of a setting, people might have like tried to create a junk park in addition to it as like a perk for the community. But now it's actually integrated into the broader network. And you can see how that is going to radiate out into the rest of the community. And then the other core thing, by bringing the building up to the street, you have actually created that sidewalk, like it's on a strode, but if that strode ever had a chance of being downgraded to become a street or improved to become a street, it would need the conditions of a reason to do that. And one of the things that you've created is that. So I'd love to go for questions if there's other thoughts, questions, objections, rebuttals, complaints. Fire away. Greg, yeah, would love to hear your thoughts.
Probably more comments than questions, but to me, pushing the building near the street also changes the view of the driver. And as they feel development push in on the street, they automatically slow down. And so I think there's a real benefit of doing that. When it comes to variances, I can't stand variances. What to me, what a variance should be is an immediate trigger to staff that there's something wrong with the code and you need to fix it really quick. If you constantly give out variances, you might as well not have any planning code, because then it's all custom stuff and you're not treating people fairly. And so I really think it should trigger a review. When it comes to stormwater, I have seen engineers design horrendous things underground to store water. And you know for a fact that within a short period of time, they'll get filled with gravel and you have no way to clean them out. But they propose them all the time. And I like the whole thing with handling stormwater on the surface, because pavement is a great way to deal with stormwater movement. And I don't think people think of it very much. Like, they get upset when your streets flood, but your streets can handle one heck of a lot of stormwater all by themselves, especially if you have curb and gutter. And then finally, with planning process, one thing that's frustrated me for a long time is when you have a preliminary process and you make them put up all of the stuff you would do for the final platting process, and you tell them, we need you to answer these 40 different questions. And when they answer them, they say, well, we need you to answer 40 more questions. And then they answer those, and then you have 40 more questions. And to me, if you do this stuff at all, you should have a process to give them the information or the questions you need to have answered right away. And then not put them through the ringer for the preliminary process. It should just be a real light review of this. Yeah, this looks like it's going to fit. And now let's move to the final planning. And I've just seen too many times where you do the preliminary one and then you move to the final one and you start the exact same process all over again. What a total waste of time for everybody.
When I started my last jurisdiction, the preliminary had a longer application. Like, there were more questions and more things that had to be submitted than the final. And I found that was just so infuriating, and they wondered why nothing was being built. What we really have to do when we talk about submittal timelines, what is the hierarchy of questions we need to ask? So let me talk about a subdivision where we're setting up new blocks, because that one's a little bit easier than maybe a building site, because we can visualize a little bit better. When we lay out a new neighborhood, I am not as concerned with what the buildings are going to be in that neighborhood at that level. At that first phase, I am thinking about the interconnectivity of streets. So I want to make sure that when I'm thinking about that site, it connects to every other road that exists and every other place of potential development could occur. I want to make sure in a new neighborhood that the next piece I'm going to be thinking about is, like, where are the open spaces? Where are those pieces at in it, and can everybody get to it? I may want to think about in those roads what we would expect in the roadway, travel lanes, on-street parking, sidewalks. Those are the things that at the first level of design should be shared and overlapped and looked at that phase. That's it. And that should be early in the discussion and work through. That is enough to get you to the point that you could subdivide the parcels because you know that they would all stand alone based off of that. As we go through these plans, really thinking about what is the minimum amount of stuff for the decision making. Frankly, most of the developers coming into our municipalities are what we would call paper developers. They're taking a piece of land and trying to increase the value of it, meaning they're going to upzone it to something else, or they're going to get it so that you could get a box with a drive-through on it and then sell it to somebody else to figure out all the details of the drainage and all the planning. So we just need to make sure as we go through each phase, understanding that as a city, what are the bare minimum requirements for each of the decisions we make on these permits? Only require that, review those things, and then build on it as you go forward. When it comes to variances, one of the parts of a code, and I would call a cop-out from the planning folks, it's the non-conformity section. If you go through your code and you have more than 4 sections referencing nonconformities, if you have more than 3 standards for nonconformities, it's because you haven't done enough homework to figure out what you've approved. I would go through an exercise when I've done form-based codes before in GIS to calibrate and analyze the municipality so that there was the least amount of non-conforming lots at the end of the process. So we would go through and analyze it, and a lot of very beautiful neighborhoods, the current zoning codes would have 65% of the community have a non-conformity. So we would write that any lot platted before a certain date was legal. Well, what if I wanted to build a new lot that looked just like that? Or what if somebody merged stuff and we want to split it up? So when we would do that GIS analysis, we'd be able to get to within less than 5% of the area that would fall into some sort of nonconformity. We thought that was like mediocre where we needed to be. You're always going to have an oddball lot that exists out there, but trying to do that. So yeah, as we do these code requirements, making sure that it's something that is by right and not by recommendation and not by vote of some type. Like we should be able to determine this stuff fairly early in the process. And if you're finding that if somebody's coming for a variance 4 or 5 times, if the planning commission and council is approving those every time they come in, you need to codify it as a by right piece. If people are just coming in for variances because they're doing stupid, silly stuff in your community that's negative, you need to tell staff that when they submit it, don't even waste your time. That's why I didn't go to the BZA with folks. I said, don't even waste your time because you don't have the political support. It's not part of our community. Some developers would leave because they didn't want to go through the hassle. Others, we would go and show them an alternative they could do. And the alternatives always seem to be like, it may not be the guy they have today that's going to do the project, but those developers always came back within about 2 months with 2 more developers. And they said, look, this is the first community that ever told us no before we spent any money and showed us what we could do. And they would that would flock development. The type of development our community wanted would arrive at our door.
That's fascinating. And Chuck talks about the fact that in a lot of places, or like for a local municipality, the 2 currencies you have are land and confidence. And if you have the land, you have to be good stewards of the land, the space that's available, and make, in a sense, unlock value from it. But the other part of it is the confidence that you can actually do business, that it is worth investing in a place. And those investments are not speculative. They're investments that actually build and sustain wealth within a place and prosperity as well. Other thoughts or questions? We've got another 10 minutes or so. This is fantastic. Go ahead, Donna.
I got a question.
Oh.
Just like with the crash analysis studio, which I'm signed up for, and amazingly enough, I found out that some of our friends at our city planning, public works already knew about it. I was like, wow, and they've already Okay, so that's cool. So can we now look forward to something from Edward or team about exactly what we've just had shared with us in 30 minutes or less, which just blows me away, because this is exactly what I have for several years now been saying when I've been commenting and others about a proposed development. Could we just do it a little bit better, a little bit smarter? And I would say other communities are doing it without a reference. Well, now I have bingo reference right here. Thank you very much. But it's the fact that the answer I usually get in my community, sadly, is from the agency, the city is, well, we're not the developer. Consequently, we can't tell them what to do. We're just, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, we're just thankful they're coming and spending their money, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, no. So thank you, Edward, but please come to our community and speak.
Happy to. And what I'll tell you is that tell me in the code where you're not telling somebody what to do. So in your zoning code, you're telling them like all the way down to what screws they have to use for drywall. Mm-hmm. So in your zoning code, it's the same thing. You're telling what species of tree to put in. You're telling them what paint mix you use to stripe the roads. You have all those regulations in it, and you're getting like the same thing that that is non-performing, that you're losing money on, that people are upset about. It's the reason people say no to development in general is because we have 80 years of presenting them something of a lesser value than what was there before. And what I found, I will tell you, Indiantown, when we were doing this project, had 18% unemployment, had seen zero economic development except for repaving of the roadway for 35 years. We were in the middle, this is 2010-ish. So they were not seeing a single housing development there. The ones that were there were all bankrupt. There was no money for anything. And these are the first developers coming in. And yeah, there was a lot of pressure on my shoulders because don't tell these guys to go away. But they wanted to have a discussion, a serious discussion with the county and the municipality of development. What I always found is that if we talk to developers like adults, we will get adult answers. This idea that we act like children with this stuff is foolish. And the developers know that, and they will run over us every time. They also want to make money. All those projects I did outperformed their pro forma. The value of the property went up. The reinvestment in the community went up. The amount of people buying stuff, all of that stuff went up because it was dignified. It was embracing the community. That town, nobody showed up to protest the dollar store. When the dollar store increased prices, nobody protested. This was part of their community that they could identify with. And if the dollar store leaves, whatever comes in is going to feel like something that is lasting in the community, even though it's a very temporary building. So I'm always happy to talk to folks because there's some confidence that we need to put in to communities of just kind of working through that stuff. Excited you're part of the Crash Analysis Studio. Our effort there is to take this type of mindset and get that adopted at a municipal level. And I think there's some really simple things we're seeing out of that. So if there's a group in town that wants to talk about crash analysis and how we can adopt that approach in your community, I'm happy to set that up and spend an hour or two to go through with your community, or even come to town and sit around the table and do one of these, because this is just a different way of thinking to get us to stronger communities.
And I'm going back to a couple of weeks ago, the development has to do with putting in mixed residences and also turns out to be probably a Winco. And when the neighbors found out that Winco was interested, they were going, but we already have 5 major grocery stores within just a hop, skip, and a jump. And then, but the thing is, they started because they're so frustrated. And I heard they're realizing they need to bridge the gap and meet the city halfway rather than just say no. So here's what they came in and said. I was so impressed, and I pointed out at this public meeting about that they said, well, if you're going to do this, couldn't you do it so that we as neighbors would enjoy walking down and spending some time in the environment with our kids, or walking or sitting or bicycling, as opposed to this huge paved parking lot with bright lights in it? And there was absolutely no response from the city whatsoever. And so this is exactly, and I just want to share this, that we used to have, before 2015, a county-city joint agency for planning. It was called the Joint Community Development Agency. And in 2015, the city decided they didn't want to share, and so they pulled out. It's quite dramatic. And they named their department Development Services. And I'm just, as you've been talking, I've just been playing with words here, going, the first word is development. Well, you know what the county did? And disclaimer, I'm on the County Planning Commission, but it's just advisory. But the county then was forced to recreate their own separate department. It's community development. Community is the first word. Simple as that. So what an inspiring morning. Thank you, Edward.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Donna.
Oh my God, I can relate to so much of this stuff, because for decades, the developers have taken the city for a ride. They can't develop anything unless there's subsidy. It will take almost 4 years to get something planned and shoveled to dirt. And specifically, we have approved, I would say, almost 2,000 housing units, mostly apartments right now. And with the economic change and interest rate going up, they can't build them now. They could have built them, 2 years ago when the interest rate was lower, but dragging all this process out has really hurt the community. And I don't know what to do. I do like the idea of being much more open and flexible. I'm very much supportive of reviewing the code, but I also get sometimes a blank stare when I talk about this. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or how I can approach differently.
Yeah, I got lots of blank stares. I got pulled to the principal's office many, many times. I kept being told by the planning director. So I was in an anti-growth, a no-growth county. If you look at it in Florida and you see I-95 and it wings way, way out to Lake Okeechobee in the middle of nowhere, that's the county I was in. So not only was I in growth management, I was in the community development department, and I was the urban designer. Like, every adjective you could put is what people ran campaigns against. But working with folks, like, they all wanted something in their community. It took me a long time to switch cultures in these different areas. And I know, Donna, we've been talking, and I need to get with your city manager because you have somebody new in charge there. We've been doing this work through the community action labs of really getting down, spending a year with the general public, putting this type of stuff out so people are more familiar with the terminology and the ideas, working with technical staff to get the confidence that they have with this and let them know that there's a different way to think through this, because I know you have staff that are super excited about doing this type of stuff, but don't know how to output that. Okay. And then I know you represent elected officials that are open-minded, that know things have to change, but you don't have the system isn't in place yet. The mind shift hasn't happened yet. Through our community action labs, we've been doing that.
Okay. Well, I was the one that initiated. I reached out to the previous city manager and said, can we at least look into this? Because the cost is to the community, like the conversation group certainly could not afford it. So it would have to come from the city. And yeah, I've pretty much tried to herd the cats, but even that is a very slow process.
Yeah, and switching city managers is not a thing you do every day. So, but we're working. I think for everybody, I want you to know that I'm available. So if you have questions, you can email me anytime at edward@strongtowns.org. I'm happy to schedule a quick chat to go through things. If you can get a group of folks together, between Norm and I, we'd be happy to host something that's more specific to an area. Kind of the next bar, if people aren't into this, so you really need to kind of get them that you're serious with it. I travel all the time. I would love to come to the community and share these things and then sit wherever we need to be with the people behind closed doors. I'll bring my markers, they can bring their trace paper, and we could show them how this might work in different ways with what they have available today with their staffing and resources.
Okay. Our urgent, well, there's, there's commercial development that wants to take place, but our urgent need right now is housing. And I know the housing trap book is out, but I'm still struggling to translate that message to the council and to the community, because the standard fallback, turn to the city for money. And to me, that's not the answer.
I have a group that I'm convening starting June 1st to go through that. And we have several financing tools that we are exploring that communities are doing that have zero risk to municipalities. So you're leveraging things like having somebody co-sign a mortgage. Cities can co-sign these things. The worst thing that would happen is they default and you foreclose on the property. Cities foreclose all the time on tax deeds. This is not like a big deal. The best thing that happen is you get more of these repeated throughout your community. There's no money out the door for these. That's kind of the beauty of it. So yes, so we're working on that, and we should have more of that coming out. And if there's specific things that we can do in the meantime to help you get that communication out, I would love to be part of that.
The city is trying to, well, the city staff is trying to put together some kind of resolution or plan that's supposed to come before city council in early June. And it is such a complicated issue. I'm not in a big rush. I would rather do incremental change. I mean, and that's the message I keep saying. We can't swallow the elephant. We have to do, one bite at a time. So
look, if we could do a more intimate thing, Donna, to go through that with your staff, we would love to do that. So there's different channels we'll go through. I will work with Chris and who we're working with staff and just keep working through that. But we would love to help. I have to run because I've got to get my son at the bus stop. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Edward. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it. And as we wrap up, I'm just want to share a note with anybody that's watching this afterwards on YouTube. I've dropped a whole bunch of links into the video description. Please do check those out. And thanks everybody for being part of this session. I hope you found it as valuable as I certainly did.